Hi, everyone, and welcome to Gamecity Impulse, the online series, the event series that we will do, talking about topics surrounding diversity. I'm Anna from Gamecity Hamburg, and we are part of Kreativgesellschaft, and we support the games industry in Hamburg. Just can you click? Yes. And today we will talk about the joy and magic of games for political action. Just will, in a few seconds, tell you all about Building All Will Rise. And I'm very happy that you're here, that you will give us a bit of a glimpse inside of a really interesting project and about what was the way to do this and still doing it. And Game City Hamburg supports the games industry in Hamburg, but we are networking everywhere. And Impulse, this online series, is a series to open up the discourse on diversity related topics. So it's really open to discuss. And we are currently now at 5.5 almost. We do the introduction shortly. Then Joost will give us a talk and we will have about 20, 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you have questions, write them down. We will come to this. No worries if we can't answer all of them probably, but I hope that you will enjoy and we will have a nice discussion. So thank you, Joost. And maybe you can give yourself an introduction, who you are and what you do. And yes, now it's your turn to tell us all about All Will Rise and political games.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope I'm easy to hear. If not, let me know, and then I'll try to do something about that. Yeah, my name is Joost Vervoort. I'm an associate professor of transformative imagination at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at Utrecht University, and also impact director for Speculative Agency, the studio that is building All Will Rise. I'm often speaking with these two hats on, as a game developer and as a researcher. And in this case, I'm also part of a European program called Strategies, which is a big EU Horizon program about the future of games, the future of games and sustainability and climate and ecology, but also how games shape our conceptions of the future. I'm here today to talk with you about the game that we have been developing and are developing, All Will Rise. And I want to talk with you about the joy and the magic of building games for political action. So I'm going to introduce the game briefly to you, introduce All Will Rise briefly to you, and then I really want to talk about what the sort of development process has been like. So just a bit of context, we are living in a time where democratic systems are gravely under threat. Fascism is everywhere. There's a kind of, as Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor argue, there's a kind of end times fascism, a kind of apocalyptic fascism that is really interested in apocalypse and sort of terraforming after the planet has been destroyed in some ways. And there's some really crazy ideas flying around. But of course, this is just an extreme version of a sort of a massive challenge around capitalism and colonialism and these things, and racism and fascism, that we have to face in these times, and it makes life extremely difficult. And then there's a question about what games can do to answer to this, right? And so there's often a sort of this sort of like assumption, and this is coming from different people, but that there's a crisis of the imagination, so that people cannot imagine a better future or a better alternative. But to call this a crisis of the imagination in some sense is really useful, but in another way is also a bit deceptive, because actually we are living in a time where the imagination has never been more powerful. We are constantly flooded with stories, with images, with narratives. The imagination is a huge sort of like this huge din of imaginative things are being created constantly, but most of this imagination is used to reinforce existing systems or just to make things worse. So there's a question of how can games help us break out of those dominant imaginations and imaginaries and open to a more radical and a better future, right? So All Will Rise is a game that has an interesting origin. A few years ago, I joined a meeting by an activist group in the Netherlands to take one of the world's biggest pension funds, ABP pension fund, to court for their unwillingness to comply with the Paris Agreement because they had 15 billion euros invested in fossil fuels. And Fossilvrij is a very small action group, and they were like, we can maybe start a court case, or we are planning to start a court case to essentially force this pension fund or strongly encourage this pension fund to divest from fossil fuels. And I thought this was an interesting approach because pension funds are not fossil fuel companies. They have sort of a duty to raise money for their pension holders, but they're not wedded to the fossil fuel industry out of ideological concerns. It's about money, right? And so I was like, interesting. And it's actually also my own pension fund because it's the Dutch pension fund for civil servants. So, and as an academic, I'm part of that, right? But also, so is the military and the police and people in local government. And so there's a huge sort of constituency of people behind this. And I thought it had a lot of sort of a high success possibility. So I joined the group's first meeting about this court case, and I was really surprised by how professional, how amazing, how inspired, and how focused this small group of activists was. And I was like, okay, how can we help this kind of cause and this sort of like social movement through game design? And then I thought of Phoenix Wright and the Ace Attorney series, and I thought, okay, can we build as someone who has worked on games for a long time, as a researcher and also on some of the sort of serious game side and so on, but I was more interested in the entertainment game space and working there. I was like, okay, how can we build a game like this that is wild and absurdist and humorous and playful, but deals with these kinds of topics? And that idea, I had that idea. I wrote the idea down a few days later in a Medium post, which I just reread again, and it was very, very interesting to read how much of that sort of vision has actually been maintained in some way. And yeah, it's just sort of proposed that the game like this should be built. And then fairly soon, I was contacted by, or was sort of reconnected by our producer, Niels Monshauer, who is a producer at, who was at the time a producer at Guerrilla Games, making Horizon Forbidden West. And we started talking about really making this game. And from that sort of conversation, we started connecting to other people. And the next person we talked to was Meghna Jayant, the writer of 80 Days and Thirsty Suitors and a number of other games, who was also very interested in getting involved. And from that moment, we sort of started building the team of people who were interested in, this sort of wild and playful approach to game design. And we'll talk a bit more about the team in a minute. But so All Will Rise is a game that is set in South India, and because a number of our team members are from India, and it's an interesting setting there. And it's a narrative courtroom deck builder that's about ordinary people who take the powerful, the billionaires, in a billionaire and a company to court for destroying the future, and specifically a sacred river. And it's made by all these people who are coming from the commercial games industry, but wanted to make something that had a sort of meaningful contribution to society. The game is set in Muziris. Muziris is a city that existed in the real world, but was flooded in the 13th century. And in our scenario, in our world, still exists. So we are in a sort of contemporary setting, but it's also speculative and in many ways a little bit different from our current world. We did that because we thought it would be really interesting to have players wonder, like, what is just the reality here in Kerala in South India, and what is different and what is a bit magical and a bit strange and a bit sci-fi. So we decided to make All Will Rise a deck builder. We had originally thought of making it a more sort of a detective game where you put a puzzle together and you unlock clues and you sort of get to that. But we thought that would be a little bit limited in terms of a diversity of strategies. So we thought sort of like unlocking a puzzle seemed limited for the players, but it also seemed to not really represent what it's like to make these kinds of cases in real life, which is much more a strategic sort of framing issue. It's about how do we put this right? For instance, there's an ongoing, I would say, trial situation between a Dutch NGO and Royal Dutch Shell going on, where they're going to they're appealing the case and so on. But the way that they frame that is that Shell, it's not about blaming Shell for their past inability or sort of inaction, but to call out their responsibility. So this is a framing question. So that's not a puzzle to solve. That's a strategic and sort of discursive thing that you're doing, right? And so All Rise is a game in which you build your strategies and your options through deck building. The way you sort of like expand the ways that you develop your ability to talk to people and to get things done and to get people on your side, or to have people tell you what's really going on by getting cards that represent different strategies. They sometimes represent evidence. So we have cards that represent evidence that gets upgraded in credibility, but also, as you see here, sort of conversational strategies. And so the game is built around these conversational battles. Uh, the other component of the game is managing your team. So we have a team of activists that, well, you have to make sure that they feel like they're being appreciated, that they're doing work that they like, that they don't burn out, that don't get overwhelmed. That's another component. And you send out your team on missions to go talk to people, find information, and they come back with more cards. So that's the loop. You and your team go out, and you go out into the world. You discover things. You play card battles, which means that you talk to people and you play cards in this sort of conversational way, and then you develop your deck, and which makes you better able to finally beat your case. And so, um, a core mechanic in the game are these card battles that are a combination of playing cards to impact your opponent's stats. So we have hearts, minds, and guts, which are different sort of dimensions of people's emotional and cognitive state that you're trying to change. You either, in some cases, try to really get people enthusiastic, or sometimes really wear them down so that they will say things that you're interested in hearing. And what I think makes All Rise really unique, and what we've really heard from players, is that the playing of the cards and in this sort of strategic systems way is completely entangled with the narrative. So you play one card to one person, and they will react very differently than another person. So for instance, we have Omanakutan, who is a sort of grumpy old NGO guy who knows a lot about sort of all about sort of taking legal and social action in Kerala and in Muziris, in our city, but is very skeptical of your approaches with your team. And so when you play the card, I speak for the river, which is a card you can play like I am the voice of the river. He's like, well, I speak for this cookie that I'm holding. I mean, what are you talking about? He's very skeptical. But then you can talk to Kotavai, who is described as an eco-terrorist priest. She's a religious figure who uses her standing with religious communities in very strategic ways to sort of take extreme action against ecological destruction. She reacts very differently to you playing that card, I Speak to the River, because she says, it sounds like you're using that as a metaphor, but what if that's real? And I don't think you really believe in what you're saying here. So you get very different responses, and sort of this dynamic between different people and how these cards are being played is a very unique system that has been very, very enjoyable to work on. So the river is burning in Muziris. There's a company responsible for this, and you have to take them to court and try to win. And you can follow multiple. The goal is for the game. So we have a demo now that's 3 hours, and the goal is for the full game to be about 6. So we are quite far in terms of content, but the idea is that the game is very replayable. So it's a short game, but you take strategies. You could take a more sort of like conservative approach or a much more radical approach, and you can follow these different strategies, work with different people, summon different witnesses, make different alliances, and shape the future of the city in different ways. So that's All Rise, and it's a really exciting game to work on, because we really wanted to make something that is funny and soulful and magical and joyful in the face of all of this very heavy, the planet is burning kind of material, right? And so Kuyili, our main character, is sort of intentionally a very playful person, almost too playful. Like people will call her out and say, "Hey, you have to take this more seriously," and because she sees opportunities and possibilities everywhere. So, the river is burning, and while she is also upset, like many other people are, she's also like, "Ooh, we could really do something with this," which is sometimes a healthy response and sometimes a little bit unhealthy, but that's something we play with. And one of the things that we've heard that has been very interesting from players who have played our demo is that they expected the game to be a lot more sort of like maybe to talk down to the player a lot more than it did. So they expected, because it's a game about ecological justice, that maybe it was going to be very serious and very you know telling you what to feel or something like that. But that's not at all what happens with All Will Rise. In fact, you are trying to make this case for a burning river, but many of the characters in the game don't take it seriously or think it's a stupid approach. And the humor comes from this sort of like conflict between different perspectives on what needs to happen, right? Um, so we have this wonderful team that we're working with, people who are coming from indie, who are coming from AAA, a bunch of ex-Guerrilla Games people, people working from all over the world, and it's been really wonderful to work together. The way that the studio is set up is that we are all working sort of part-time in sort of on a contract basis on the game in different ways, and that sort of part-time is sort of ramped up to spending a lot of time on the game in the recent year or so. So we've gone from sort of part-time work to nearly full-time work for a bunch of folks as things have ramped up. People have worked on really fantastic games before, and it's been really interesting for me as someone who's an academic and has worked on, sort of like policy games and so on, to enter in the last 4 years or so, 3, 4 years, the games industry, and to talk about the games that my team members have made, and to find out that people, there's just different demographics and different people who know some of these games. So, for instance, Niels, when I first met Niels, he worked on, I knew him from as someone who had worked on Horizon Forbidden West, but a lot of people actually know his game Tricky Towers, which is an indie game that came out about 10 years ago, and people still play it with their kids, and it's still selling really well, which is really, really fun. And it's really interesting to have people on board, for instance, like Shantae, who is our community manager, who's currently also working with the Doom the Dark Ages, and then Hugo, our developer coder, who's been involved with climate games for a long time. And so we have this really wonderful team, and it's just been a joy to work with everyone. But we also work with experts on world building. So we have done a lot of interviews with folks, originally with people from all around the world, and because we're partly based in the Netherlands, with a few of us, this sort of like Dutch activists and so on. But as Migna and Yuvraj, our narrative director and our lead artists, joined the team, and we decided to set the game in Caroline, India. We started interviewing climate activists and lawyers in India, and learning a lot about it. And one of the more interesting collaborations that we started early on was with a friend of mine called Meghna Nayak, who's a sustainable fashion designer from India, who makes really wonderful kind of futuristic fashion, and is quite well known for this. But she makes it from secondhand materials. So it's like futuristic and sustainable, and her fashion has been an inspiration for the fashion in All Will Rise, which has been very exciting. And then so to talk a bit about how all of this is going. So this is actually a slide from maybe 2 months ago or something, before we started our Kickstarter, and then I have more information about afterwards, because this is where we were at a few months ago. So we started to sort of build. We aimed, and we are still aiming for a release of the game end of the year, beginning of 2027 at the very latest. And so we were starting to build things up. We had been talking before to publishers. That has been difficult conversations. Publishers seem to be kind of hesitant to fund games that are explicitly political, maybe a bit worried about backlash and things like that, and how the political framing will influence the success of the game. So at some point we decided to go for a Kickstarter, which I don't think, and I would love to talk with you about that, which I don't think is necessarily the easiest path, especially in 2026. It might have been easier in 2013 or something, but we decided to go for that. A big thing for us was that we were hosted as part of the Wholesome Direct stream, and I think Wholesome Direct by itself resulted in 7,000 Steam wish lists. I think that's crazy. I mean, I knew that a lot of people watched Wholesome Direct and so on, but Niels recently told me that the majority of our wish lists just came after Wholesome Direct, like right away. You're part of a stream of like 90 games or something, and then to have so many people wishlist your game is amazing, right? We were part of The Guardian, all kinds of stuff. So we got picked up by media, which was great, and became part of some festivals and stuff. All very wonderful. But then we started a Kickstarter, and this was scary because Kickstarters are not, I don't think Kickstarters for games are particularly easy now, as I said. There seems to be a slight trend of that coming back, I guess. But it's a hard thing. And so we set our Kickstarter goal, but we thought, okay, but this is really a game that fits a Kickstarter model because it's a game about societal change, it's a game about community building and so on. So we said let's go for it, but we set our initial goal quite low, which we talked with lots of people who had done successful Kickstarters, including talking with Kickstarter themselves. And they said, yeah, set your initial goal quite low. So we set our initial goal to just 10,000 euros. And yeah, we made that goal in a day, which is really wonderful. It's very funny though, because All Will Rise is also a game that seeks to connect to many people outside of the games world, and also get support from people who are interested in sort of these sort of eco issues and so on. And so outside of the games world, a lot of people congratulated me right away. They were like, yeah, amazing that you made so much, money for this game, and you have your 10,000, and now you can build, you can build All Will Rise. And I was like, well, we set the goal a little bit low because actually game development is quite a lot more expensive than 10,000 euros, right? But we were very happy with this, and then the Kickstarter sort of like kept moving. And then a few things happened. So first of all, we this was an exciting time. We ended our Kickstarter with 60,000 funding, which is really wonderful, and certainly higher than we expected. We reached most of our stretch goals, really great. And yeah, it was really the whole team was constantly sort of like working on this Kickstarter. But one thing that was really interesting that created a lot of media, a big media stir, much more than we expected actually, and that really helped raise the profile of the game during the Kickstarter was this. So we had received a contract from Xbox to develop to port All Will Rise to Xbox and to release it on Xbox, and we received a significant amount from them to do that. But then we became aware of a campaign called No Games for Genocide that was about boycotting Microsoft for their very direct involvement in the genocide in Gaza. And we decided to back to support this campaign by giving our funding essentially by canceling our contract with Microsoft. Microsoft responded very well. I mean, the person that we were in contact with was like, we really would have liked your game on our platform, but we respect and understand your decision. And we thought, okay, we should at least announce this decision during our Kickstarter because maybe we'll get a bit of support, and people will appreciate it. But I think, just speaking for myself, I thought the response would be from some people to be like, that's great, well done, and that was it. But it really exploded. So we had before the Kickstarter, we had sort of a press release, and we had all this stuff that went out to all the big magazines. but we didn't really get that much coverage from anyone, even though we had been covered before by Rock Paper Shotgun and The Guardian and PC Gamer. But we released the Kickstarter at the time of Steam Next Fest, which was both a blessing and in some ways also a bit difficult. Because the blessing was that lots of people played our demo because we had, and this is important to say as well, we had this 3-hour demo that came with the Kickstarter, which seems to definitely be one of the success factors, that people could actually play a game, right? Because part of the reason I think that Kickstarters are not doing so well anymore these days is that people have been burned too many times by promises. And so we had a demo that people could play, and there were streamers playing the game, and people were very positive about the game, which I think is still the best sort of like thing out of this whole Kickstarter. Is you build a game and you think is great, and you have all these ideas about it, and you have play tested it, and you have some sense of what people think about it when they play it, but it's still not the same thing as releasing it to the world, right? And so releasing it to the wide world, and then getting just so many good responses from streamers and players was wonderful. But we didn't really get much coverage from the big game magazines. We were covered in some lists, some of the Steam Next Fest sort of like recommendation lists, which was really great, by PC Gamer and some others. But then this story about giving money back to Microsoft really blew up. We were in a bunch, as you can see, we were in a bunch of different magazines, platforms talking about it. And it's an interesting thing to think about, because the part of the reason I think that this became so big was that, I mean, you can say all kinds of political stuff, but actually putting your money where your mouth is, of course, is a very different thing, right? Because for us, giving that money back to Xbox is a big deal. And even bigger a deal is that we don't release the game on Xbox. That's like a big decision that is going to really hurt us, right? So people understood that this is a political position that we're taking, that is not just saying some stuff. And the interesting thing is that people also, I think, understood that this really connects to what the game is about. So you get this really interesting congruence and coherence between the game topic and the politics of the game and the politics of the game studio, which was great, and it's a wonderful that happened. And that certainly helped us with some of the sort of attention on the Kickstarter. I don't think it made it didn't double our Kickstarter or something like that. But it helped with an extra few thousand at least, which is always welcome. But more importantly, I think, is this sort of perception of that we are serious about our politics and so on. And I think that was really interesting to experience. And it's not something you can really do, we just made that decision because we thought it would be ethically appropriate to be part of No Games for Genocide, and then this happened. But so a little bit more about that, because I think with All Will Rise, we are building a game that's good, that's interesting, that's exciting and new and original and so on, and people love it when they play it. Our remaining development struggle is maybe to make it a little bit more accessible. Like, the mechanics are quite deep, and sometimes we saw people on streams like sort of getting a little overwhelmed. So we're going to sort of make it a bit more, we're going to tutorialize it a bit more, make it a bit more accessible and transparent. But it's a game that people really love. They love the art, they love the narrative, they love the mechanics, they love the world building. It's wonderful. But rising above the sort of din of all the indie games that are out there is, of course, for all of us, I think, the challenge, right? And so this is something that we're still thinking about now, because obviously with this Kickstarter being successful, getting all this attention, getting lots of followers and so on, we are in a good position. But breaking even with this game is still going to be very difficult, because obviously behind the scenes a lot more money has had to go into the game to make this possible. A lot of in-kind time, people just putting in their time now to do it, and so even breaking even is going to be difficult and a big challenge. So we're very actively thinking about how do we make, because a game that's like a deck builder and it's a narrative RPG and it's about the south of India and Kerala, and it's about eco cases. It's a lot, right, for people to take in. You're introducing a lot of new things at the same time, and so there's a marketing challenge there. But a few things I want to say about this that I thought was really interesting was that entangled the game really with real life causes, obviously with No Games for Genocide, but also, for instance, there's a small activist sort of like a social movement group called the Collectieve Beweging, the collective movement in the Netherlands, and they said, "Hey, can we fund you for a little bit? We can be one of your backers, and we can maybe do some work together." And that was really wonderful to do. We also worked with some real life people who are actually doing these court cases, including Fossielvrij, the organization that inspired all of this, wrote a bunch of stuff about us. There's a Eco Justice who are doing really the same thing as the All Will Rise team. You know, they're taking a company to court for polluting a river, and we worked with them, and they promoted the game. We promoted their work. Uh, and then one thing that was really interesting to me that happened was on the right here, you see this board meeting situation. This was I was in there as well. This was me and a bunch of the Fossielvrij activists talking to the chairman of the board, who you see at the end of the table there, of the ABP pension fund. Again, one of the biggest pension funds in the world. We were talking with ABP because they have indeed divested their 15 billion from fossil fuels, which is amazing. This happened within a few weeks of setting up that court case. The court case was announced, but it never actually went to court because they already decided to drop their fossil fuel investments, which was this incredible, joyful experience for the activist group that was part of the inspiration for All Will Rise. But this is a new situation where we're talking to ABP about their collaboration with BlackRock, the world's biggest asset manager, and BlackRock is pulling out of all kinds of climate agreements and doing all kinds of horrible investments in general. And so we are talking to ABP about can you reconsider working with BlackRock? So we were there talking with them about that as pension holders. And I was sitting in that meeting, and it was like seeing All Will Rise in real life. Like you have the CEO, you have the activist group, you have, the CEO's communications manager is here, their marketing strategist is there, their technical specialist is there, and the conversation is like not unfriendly, but it's definitely strategic. So we were all, as pension holders, given one question to ask them, almost like we were given a card, and then the CEO says things, he's playing these cards. For instance, we have a card in All Will Rise that's like, uh, prove it. So if someone plays a card, then you can play prove it as like a block that there's not enough evidence. So if the card is low in its credibility, which there is a rating for, then this card, you can block a card. And he basically told the activists, you don't have enough evidence for BlackRock's wrongdoings. Of course we did, but this was a card that was played. So then we had to sort of show the evidence. And I was really watching an All Will Rise card battle happen at the table there. And there's this interesting way in which this political game development that we're doing with this game, reality and game reality are completely entangled. The No Games for Genocide thing, the working with small action groups for the Kickstarter, the inspiration from real life, which then comes back to it, and so on, which has been super exciting to experience. One thing that I wanted to show in this middle screenshot here from Blue Sky, this article by Rock Paper Shot. There's two things here. This article by Rock Paper Shotgun, where media can really frame your game in a way that's like, yes, this is exactly what we meant, right? So they call it a gloriously unearthly anti-capitalist deck builder, and I was like, gloriously unearthly. That's exactly what we hoped. We wanted to not make it a dry, boring sort of like court game about blaming people for the destruction of the planet or something. It had to be playful and strange and cosmic and magical, and it is, right? And people pick it up. Yeah. So finding I guess the larger point that I'm interested in with all of this, also as a researcher, is the 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 magic of the politics of making a better world. What we don't want to do with All Will Rise is make a game that tells people that, ecological destruction is bad or corporations is bad. People know, right? We know. What we want to do with the game is show that it can be interesting and fun and difficult and frustrating sometimes, but definitely also magical and joyous to get involved in the chaos of society. Me being there with these people talking to the chairman of the board of ABP was a super interesting experience. and we want All Will Rise to be a game that inspires people to get involved, take action, get messy, and try to do these kinds of things. Now, I mean, this is sort of the end of my story, and then I would like to open for questions. We are a little more than about three quarters of a year away, two-thirds of a year away from release of All Rise. We um, have a bunch of game development to do still, making the game a little bit more accessible and streamlining all of that. Developing a bunch of content to make the game a sort of replayable 6-hour game, as I mentioned. Developing a lot more art. Our lead artist has been a bit sick in the last year, and we're very happy that he has recovered. But you can imagine if you have one artist, like one lead artist in this case, anyway, next to our UI developer Marocha, and who is also making art for the game. These are the situations of indie development, right? That can be really difficult. But that's all going well. Yeah, we are really thinking very hard about, okay, we have built a great basis for this game. People are interested. It's standing out. It's sticking out of the sort of the wheat field, But how do we really make this a success? This is a big question, right? Because, for instance, the No Games for Genocide story, that's not something you can replicate, right? That's something that we did out of ethical concern, and people recognize that, and it was a massive, downside also for the company and not releasing on Xbox and so on, and that gained, a positive response. But those are not the kinds of things that you can build into your marketing strategy, right? That just happens, and you just, and it happens. So that's really interesting. But we are thinking that the principle of having the politics and the sort of actions of the studio in the real world connect very strongly to what the game represents is one thing. But another thing, though, is that we also want to have a line of communication about All Will Rise that's not about the politics at all, because it's a really fun game. It's really interesting. The world building is great, the art is great, and so on. So there's another part of our audience out there and our players out there who are just interested in, deep world building, and they're interested in role playing and so on. And they will hopefully like the politics, right? But that's not something that we don't have to sort of like lean on that for all the audiences. It's certainly been, I think contrary to some expectations that think, okay, games that are political don't do well or whatever. In our case, I would say that the sort of challenging politics, especially around billionaires and the normal people versus the powerful, has been a benefit. But there's an entire sort of group of players out there who are not interested in this and who we also want to reach, right? Partly because we want to get them interested in it through the game, right? So I think there's a lot more there, but I would love to open the floor to questions. And yeah, it's been one of the most interesting, fun things I've ever done in my life, even so far. Like even running that Kickstarter was just, I don't think everyone would like this, but I loved it. I was just so into it, waking up day and night, thinking about new ways to communicate about the game. And yeah, and getting all kinds of unexpected responses. Really wonderful. So yeah, get in touch if you're interested in more. But yeah, let's open the floor to questions.
Thank you so much. This was really a ride to experience. Thank you so much. I will now push this button